I started looking elsewhere and found an oil man and his family who was buying a bunker like the one in the film, and then that gradually turned from documentary to musical.
This is Climate Curious, the podcast for people who are bored, scared, or confused by climate change.
I'm Maryam, Pasha, the director and curator at TEDxLondon and the co-host of this podcast, alongside the amazing Ben.
Hi, I'm Ben Hurst, activist and advocate exploring what positive masculinities can look like, and self-confessed climate normie.
Hello, Ben.
Oh, hey.
Hey. You know what? I think it's really fun that sometimes our homework for this podcast is that we get to watch films.
Watching a movie, can you imagine? I just feel like in life I never get enough time to sit down and watch movies. I'm like so addicted to series now.
I mean, you know me, I love storytelling and film and all of this. And I am at the moment really not obsessed isn't the word, but I'm really engrossed in the idea of the role of culture and film making, particularly in the climate conversation. Because I think film has an ability to transport us and experience and feel things that really is super powerful. It's I would say only second to personal experience. So anyway, I'm very excited. I'm very excited about this episode.
We can tell.
So basically not going to waste anyone's time now, just talking about my obsession. Let me tell you all about who we have on today's episode. Can I do that, Ben? Can I go
Yes,
ahead?
please.
Okay. So today we are joined by Joshua Oppenheimer. He is an American Oscar-nominated film director known for his films The Art of Killing and The Look of Silence. So he's now taken a step towards climate storytelling with a new film called The End, a post-apocalyptic musical about life after the fossil fuel crisis ends the world, told through the lens of a wealthy energy exec's family who live in this kind of bizarre, strained life in total isolation underground in a salt mine cave. And after decades alone, the family encounters a stranger. Ooh. Now, look, let's be very honest, Ben. There are going to be some spoilers in this episode.
Yeah.
Look, I actually would say that if you have or haven't watched the film, I would listen to this episode because we talk about some stuff that's going to be super interesting and I think would actually maybe even change the way some people watch this film. I'm excited to go back and rewatch it now, listening to what Joshua is going to say. So anyway, let's get into it. Let's just jump into our conversation with Joshua Oppenheimer now. Joshua, thank you so much for joining us. I want to jump right in and just say, for the very tiny number of people who probably haven't watched this film yet, could you just give us a quick overview of what The End is about? Which I know is a really hard thing to ask someone to do, but will you try for us?
The End is a golden age musical about a last human family surviving alone in a bunker decades after environmental collapse has left the world uninhabitable. And at the same time, this is an oil man's family, so it sort of embodies the climate catastrophe at one level, and at another level, it's the entire human family. It's an allegory, and at another level, the characters are nameless because it's each and every one of our families. It's each and every one of us to me. And so in that sense, they go on almost as if nothing has happened. They try to pretend that nothing has changed. And so in a certain deep sense, it's about denial and false hope, false optimism that kind of is what makes musicals both delightful and often cheesy. And in this case, tragic. And in that sense, that's why it's a musical too.
Amazing. And I have lots of questions about those choices, but I want to ask because the last two films that people might know you from were both documentaries about a different topic altogether. What made you be drawn to making a film about the fossil fuel crisis and climate change?
Well, I think that those earlier films were also about the unique human capacity to lie to ourselves. How, we rationalize inaction. We make up excuses to justify things we've done that we know are wrong. And I really wanted to take this home to all of us, the questions that were explored in those films, by looking at how, where is cognitive dissonance? Where is self-deception, which is what I'm talking about, really most urgent in our own lives? And I think that the sense that we're hurtling toward extinction if we do not radically transform how we live on Earth now. That felt like the most pressing issue I could look at. It's this is a little kind of academic sounding, but the word apocalypse comes from the Greek uncovering, revealing. It's why the book of Revelations in the Bible is called Revelation, because in Greek it was apocalypse. And we are the first humans in the world's history who already know how we will end, how we will go extinct if we carry on as we are. So baked in the logic of our behavior now is the end, which means when we say we already know that, it's already been revealed to us, which is to say we are living post-apocalypse already unless we change. And those two documentaries, which took place in the aftermath of a genocide, where the perpetrators had won, and it was a kind of dystopia of mass murderers in power and boasting, those were post-apocalyptic too, in the sense that here was a society that had been so traumatized and everyone is living in fear. I wanted to make a third film there about the billionaires who enriched themselves by really exploiting a country that was terrified of them. But after those films came out, I couldn't return safely to Indonesia. I was banned. And so I started looking elsewhere and found an oil man and his family who was buying a bunker like the one in the film. And then that gradually turned from documentary to musical.
Oh my gosh. So this started as a documentary. That's crazy. Who was no, I'm joking. Don't tell me who the person was, but that's such an interesting, so this is actually based on a real life story that you were researching, I'm assuming.
Yeah, exactly. I found once I couldn't return to Indonesia, I found an oil tycoon I was researching oligarchs elsewhere who'd made their money through violence. And I found a tycoon who had obtained his drilling rights for his oil fields using violence and intimidation. He was from former Soviet Central Asia. And he invited me to see, I was getting to know his family and filming with them a bit. And he invited me to tour an underground cavern where he was planning to build a bunker. And he explained that I said, what would you be hiding from? And he said, well, the biggest risk is probably the indirect effects of climate change. He thought that, you would have billions of people on the move migrating from parts of the world that would become uninhabitable. And he thought there would be no stopping that. A border fence, no matter how fortified, wouldn't be able to stop billions of people, he thought, when people's lives depended on getting north or getting away from the rising sea. And so he thought you'd have a breakdown in nation states. You'd have a warlordism. You'd have nuclear weapons falling into the hands of local warlords. And then you'd have sort of spiraling nuclear war regionally growing into global catastrophe. And we toured this underground cave system that he was yet to decorate into this sumptuous bunker. And it was meant to have many of the same features you see in the film, an art vault for all of their fine, for their incredible art collection, a wine cellar for the most important bottles of wine in history, ways of growing food in perpetuity. And I just was haunted by questions of guilt as we walked. First of all, his wife had been on her phone the whole journey to this place, texting with relatives, looking at nieces and nephews who were just born or who were toddlers. And then there was one that she just had a new niece or nephew, I can't remember. And she was just clearly gregarious with her family at the very least. And I thought, how will you cope with your remorse for leaving all these people behind? Because she didn't intend to bring them. And I thought, how are those relationships already being hollowed out by the eventual betrayal that you are kind of holding in your heart at this point? Because she wasn't telling, I said, do they know about the bunker? And she said, no, and I don't know that we'll put this in the film. And then the father, I thought, how will you cope with your guilt from the catastrophe from which you would be fleeing? How would you raise a new generation in such a place as a kind of blank canvas onto which you could paint an idealized picture of yourself, to whitewash your past from yourself, which, if you know about my earlier work, that's like my core theme, how we lie to ourselves about who we are, how we live with guilt. And I just couldn't imagine making anything else with this family other than the fly on the wall documentary set in the bunker 25 years after they moved in. And I wasn't going to be invited along. That was not a viable plan.
There's clearly no space in this.
So I on the way home, unsure what I would do with this, I watched one of my very favorite films, which is a musical, on the plane home. And it hit me. This is the genre of sort of a kind of false hope, really a despair that pretends to be hope. The idea that the sun, you can bury your head in the sand and be completely passive in the face, even as you know you're running straight toward the abyss, even in this post-apocalyptic moment. To go back to what I said earlier, you can go straight toward the abyss and the sun will come out tomorrow, as they sing in Annie, no matter what. That to me isn't hope. That's not optimism. That's just delusion. And I thought this is the quintessential genre of delusion. And we should make a musical about this family, and I'll call it The End. I'll make the family American because it's a quintessentially American genre, and America's taken the lead in building up emissions. And now we have Drill Baby Drill, and it'll be a golden age musical. And Donald Trump has just announced we're in our new golden age. So I thought, I didn't know that yet, but yeah, so that's how it came about.
I think it will be absolutely mind-blowing for people to hear that this is based on people who are actually planning to live the end of the world like this. Because I think when I was watching the film, all I could think about is, God, I wouldn't want to be in that bunker. Like, I hope I never have to ever, in my life have a choice like that. Or I hope I never, I don't want to be there. There's that feeling of like, I just had a son who's 5 months when we were recording this. And I just thought to myself, how do you balance that feeling of being like, actually, would I want to for him? Would I want to like be here and protect him, knowing that probably is the safest place? But then how could you choose who would be here with you? And it was really like quite. And I thought to myself, well, it's good. It is a part of my brain was like, well, it's good that this is just fiction. And then to hear you say that actually there are people who are thinking this way, it feels incredible to me.
I think it's a beautiful response, because when people ask me kind of the provocative question, what would you bring? I have exactly the same response. I wouldn't want to ever make that choice. We all face similar questions to this family in our own lives. When you face an end of life choice, how many of us are tempted to just prolong medical intervention when you if you actually have reached the end, or to prolong medical intervention for a loved one whose quality of life has dwindled to nothing. I think about this a lot. The mother in the family, the mother in the real family, it's Anne, the mother played by Tilda Swinton, in the end is revealed to have left her family behind and is suffering from the guilt of that. And I think, if something happened to my stepmother, for example, and I knew my dad wanted to move in with me, and maybe that would be not the best decision for him or for me, I don't know. But I followed the path of least resistance and just arranged care for him. And then I followed the next path of least resistance, which would be never to talk about it. In that moment, I would have lost my dad in the last stages of his life. And then I would live with that forever. And I think, in a certain way, The End is really a film about love. And it's a call for honesty with ourselves and starting with the people we love most. Because when you impose lies, or when you're too ashamed or defensive or scared to raise the difficult issues between you and the people you love, we all have experienced this. Our relationships, our friendships, our family relationships can become these kind of minefields of silence and these no-go areas. And we hollow out our ability to lead meaningful lives. And I do not say this when we lie to ourselves. I do not say this to be a scold. I say this because we have only one chance to have a meaningful life on earth.
It feels like a real invitation to your audience to consider some things that maybe people don't enjoy considering. I always think there's this like big existential question when it comes to creating art, which is like, do you make art for yourself or do you make art for the audience that you're creating? Like, is there an audience that you were creating this for? And I'm wondering, like, when you made this film, did you have people in mind that you thought were gonna, like, was it directed at the oil executives, or is it for the general populace, or was it just for you? Was it just satisfying that urge to create that fly on the wall documentary 25 years from now? Like, who were the people that you were building this for?
It's for the general audience, in the sense that when I'm asked the question as a filmmaker, who's your audience? I always think it's someone like me who doesn't know anything about the story.
Right.
And that's the only way. Now, that doesn't mean it's everyone. It's like demographically like me. I'm looking at, middle-aged guy like myself. It's just that someone whose soul is open, who has all the biases I might have, all the whatever open-heartedness I may have, whatever. And that's only because I don't know how to honestly anticipate. I feel like I would be patronizing the moment I try to widen that. It's like, oh, well, what would the oil executive's wife think? What would my sister-in-law think? What would someone who a survivor of the genocide in Indonesia who appreciated my last two films think? I end up, you start sort of patronizing or condescending, and I stop knowing how I can only really, I'm the first viewer of my film. I have to kind of trick my mind as I watch it, as I'm editing it, to see how does this, as to feel like I've never seen it before. And then I can broaden it out with listening to, test audiences and stuff, which of course I do when I'm editing, but it's for every human being who wants to, who believes, and I think, it does ask some challenging questions, in the sense that most film, most television repeats the kind of what I think of as the Star Wars morality, where the world, now Star Wars as a story has some complex, interesting moral dilemmas in it, of course, but as an overall view of the world, there's like the light and the dark, there's good guys and there's bad guys. And most film and television reassures us that we're like you get to enjoy watching the bad guys get their comeuppance, and you get to feel reassured that ultimately, despite whatever complexity there is, you're one of the good guys. And I think that's a lie. I mean, in the sense that every act of evil in our history, every act of destruction in our lives, that's in our world, has been perpetrated by human beings like us. The great thinker of the Holocaust and survivor of the Holocaust, Primo Levi, wrote, there may be, speaking of the Nazis and the Holocaust, there may be monsters among us, but they're too few to worry about. We have to focus on how ordinary people like ourselves get locked into destructive patterns of behavior. And if my work's about anything, it's about something we all know from our own lives, how when we're defensive, we can double down and keep and actually become more destructive, not because we believe what we've done is right, but because we know it was wrong. We know it's wrong, but we don't see a way.
There's no choice
to changing. Yeah. We don't see a way of changing either, because we feel powerless or we're defensive. And we, therefore, if we change now, we admit it was wrong before. That's the big dilemma of Mother. There's in the bunker, in the end, I'm spoiling nothing really by saying this. A young woman arrives and they say that they're afraid of her, and they say that she's a danger. But actually, Mother blurts out pretty much immediately, we can't let her stay, because if we let her stay, what about all the other people we didn't let stay? Suddenly I'm a murderer. Yeah, exactly.
I want to delve into a couple of specific bits of the film and ask you about them. The father is, I guess, writing his memoir for the world, which I found quite ironic anyway, where I was like, what world? Like what, it seems pretty obvious that there's nothing left, and he's writing this memoir, and he's getting to retell, I think, his story. This is my interpretation of it with his own lens. And I think, you said that a bit. A few times in this film, there's this idea of like, I had no choice. I had to do it this way. And the same with the way that the father seems to tell the story and want to rewrite parts of it. I want to understand like that creative decision of having the father write this story?
Yeah. First of all, the idea of saving your family in a bunker and telling yourself the world sort of continues as if nothing changed. So instead of saying, whoa, that's a wake up call, let's change how we live now, even if which is sort of the message that the young woman, Moses Ingram's character, brings. The idea that you're just going to kind of carry on, that your wealth, your success, your prestige, your power will just continue in this kind of abyss of meaninglessness where they're living. That to me is that's kind of an immortality project. It's the idea of, and it's absurd. And I thought that, I mentioned earlier, the father, what kind of, how might you use and misuse your kid as a blank canvas onto which you can paint a kind of idealized portrait of yourself. The father's enlisted his son, and it's an act of kind of abuse, not physical abuse, but kind of manipulation that he's enlisted his son in lying about his own past, the father's past, and thereby deprive the son of any knowledge of the world. That it was the idea that the son is sort of forced to do this in different ways for both parents. I love the absurdity of it. There's a beautiful moment where he's telling, where after they finally allow the young woman's character to stay, they kind of have her over for dinner, a kind of welcome dinner where they've almost just killed her by throwing her out again. And the father asks this question, and I can absolutely hear my father asking at an awkward dinner, well, I guess she'd like to hear a little bit of what we do around here. I'm writing a book, and hopefully someone will read it. And the girl is like this kind of witness to the absurdity of that. So that's one of the moments where the film, I guess hearing your question, Maryam, that it kind of tips into the absurd, and it reminds us through the girl's eyes, through the Moses Ingram character's eyes, of the just craziness of the whole thing. And that's, I think, structurally in terms of the story, that aligns us with her, makes us see that actually if anyone has the answers here, it's going to be her. And it's right out of that she starts opening up, sort of blowing the son's mind. I think the other piece of it is that, if you grow up, the parents are constantly lying to the son. And in a way, he's before the young woman arrives, the son is the only member of his generation. Everyone's older. And they the whole bunker's really a pact of silence where they're lying to her. And there's a kind of pact of silence among the older people not to tell each other's secrets to the son. But of course, over 25 years, things leak out until he actually knows a lot more than each of them think he does, and is kind of complicit with those lies. And we see it in that first memoir scene early in the film when the son's writing a chapter for the father. You see him writing things that he shouldn't write about the father's human rights abuses in Indonesia, of all places. And the father makes the father very uncomfortable, and the son's, oh, don't worry, we'll just write something else, because there's no human right, there's no truth to worry about. What he has to worry about is pleasing his dad. And that whole way of creating the son as someone who has, like, as you would have to if you're doomed to end up alone, because everyone else will die if they die natural deaths before he does. So he's born into this trap of ending up alone. And if you have to imagine how will you live a life alone in this place after everyone else is gone, you would need truth. And so he's developed this kind of radar for truth. And he's like, the whole physicality by which George Mackay plays son is like that he flinches and sort of twitches almost every time truth pierces the bubble of illusion that he's supposed to be living within, or every time he remembers something truthful that he's not supposed to know.
There's something else that really struck me about this when I stepped back at the end and I thought of the film, and I thought, for me, it felt like a metaphor, an analogy, whichever, of how there is a thinking that there's an appropriate amount of people to sacrifice for us to continue living our lives the way we want to live them. And that eventually, if you continue to sacrifice and save yourself, like whether we think of ourselves as our families or our countries or the West or whatever it might be, there is no way to continue. Like the sun, until they were willing to save someone else, this woman who arrives, there was no future for the sun after a certain point. And that's what really struck me. And I wonder if that's deliberate, like if that's something that you were thinking about how we are so focused on maybe trying to save a small group of people and let them preserve their lives exactly as they are while sacrificing everyone else, and how that is a dead end to itself.
Yeah, I really believe that we are, and this is kind of a moral view. This has to do with the idea that, you know, however we die, whenever the species, if we go extinct because an asteroid hits us, or we go extinct because of rogue AI, or we survive the climate catastrophe and all of these existential problems, and we go extinct because the sun becomes a black, a red giant and then swallows the earth and we die in a black hole or whatever. Whatever eventually does us in, because at some point, something will. The question is, how do we live? It's in all of our natures to die individually. And the question, if our lives are to be meaningful, is how do we live? And I feel that baked into that exclusive notion where we protect our own families or our own countries in opposition to the broader human family, of which we all know we're part, and on which we all know we depend to feed ourselves, to clothe ourselves, to mine the rare earth metals that will get us out of this climate crisis, and that are at the core of these technologies through which we're speaking now and recording this podcast. The idea that we can exclude them is, I believe, part of the same destructive logic that is leading us right toward the end, because it's a kind of me first, me now logic that prevents collective action, that leads people to think, I won't bother to get involved collectively in the structural struggle against climate change, and fossil fuel misinformation and the fossil fuel continued burning of fossil fuels. It's the selfishness of isolationism. And I think it takes on so many destructive forms. Like if the film is a plea against anything, it's against isolation. You know, it may, a family that has just continued down the destructive course right over the edge of the cliff, despite having already had revealed to them that if they continue, as has been already revealed to all of us, we will destroy ourselves. That family, the last human family, can't have a happy ending. So yes, the end is a tragedy, but as a movie, it's making it. It's also a cautionary tale. It's also a wake-up tale. It's also full of sincerity and compassion and love for these not always these damaged characters. And in that sense, the making of it is an act of hope. You don't make a cautionary tale. You don't deploy all these resources to make a cautionary tale unless you believe there's still time for the audience to heed the warning. So we will leave, the audience will leave the cinema, or you'll finish the film and you'll look outside, or you'll leave the cinema and go outside. And as Tilda always says about the film, and when she first signed up to it, there's still a sky out there. We still have time. And I think it was a beautiful point you made, Maryam, that we don't have that idea that if we just keep prioritizing ourselves in opposition to everyone else, that is the core of the logic that's leading us right off the cliff. We need the widest possible compassion to have the solidarity necessary for change now.
While you were talking, I was thinking it's like playing Monopoly, and when you get to the end of the game and you win, then you pack the game up and put it away and then go and live your life and come back. But there's no, I guess, getting to the end of this game, if we gamify it, getting to the end and winning still results in losing, which is like a pretty interesting framing.
I want to ask, so, okay, one of your previous films, The Art of Killing, right? I read, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, that they showed it in Congress. And They showed it in the US Congress, the United States Congress, and your hope was that the US would admit to its role in what was happening, the genocide in Tunisia that you talked about earlier. And as part of that, they declassified a whole series of files related to what was happening there. And that was and I think they cited, right, the impact of the film in their decision to do that. And that's pretty direct and I think pretty unusual for films to have that kind of very clear, tangible causal line. When you think about the end, if we zoom out and think about it, what is the impact as a creator of this that you would like it to have? Is there something specific? Is it cultural? Is it policy? Where does your mind go?
Well, I think first and foremost, I want it to push us away from the isolationist me first solutions, the kind of bunkering mentality. Mm-hmm. I want it to make us aware of, I want it to do so by making people aware of how they lie to themselves, how they rationalize inaction, how they say, oh, I can't be bothered to actually go to a protest, to actually get involved with real climate activism, when we know actually that's what this moment demands of us.
Do you feel that as storytellers or as filmmakers or as artists, what role do you feel you have in this climate movement or in this movement to help us not be marching towards this kind of end?
I think for me, what I can do is get people to recognize themselves in the people they see on screen. And just so that, I think that if you can get people to identify in these ultimately quite broken people, mother and father, it's what I did in my film, The Act of Killing too. If that film made an impact, it wasn't just because it exposed new information. It was because viewers saw the humanity of the mass murderer and saw, oh no, if we want to prevent this, we have to think of other ways of living together. So this kind of behavior is not encouraged and becomes impossible. Similarly, if people can identify in the mother and the father and the son, how they in their own lives minimize, rationalize, sentimentalize, lie to themselves, and surrender to ultimately what I think people don't think of as despair and fatalism, but is, I think we throw sand in the works. We throw sand in the gears so that next time everything in our culture encourages us to do that, there's just a little moment. It's harder. It's like trying to think about how do you, it's hard to walk if you think about how you do it, or something that becomes automatic becomes unnatural. And it's wait, no, this isn't good enough. So in that sense, I hope that this film opens our heart to new ways of being, because the current way we're living is lonely and inadequate, and people know it.
One of the things that I'm really interested in is, in the process of making this film, did you come up against any resistance or any challenges, either personally or professionally? Was this something that everybody was completely behind? Was it something that got greenlit really easily? Was it something that was difficult for you to make as an individual? Was there any moments of tension in the creation process?
We called them documentaries, but my earlier films are so wild in their conception. I mean, The Act of Killing, if it had an elevator pitch, was Death Squad members make a musical, and it didn't have an elevator pitch, but it was wild that it kind of bought me freedom to propose something as crazy as this. I think where this film has become, I think where the end hit headwinds was one financial, as COVID kind of completely transformed what was fundable. But maybe given what we're talking about, the deeper and more interesting way it hit headwinds is, I think as we dug deep into the writing and then ultimately in the songwriting and then in the integrating of the songs and the script into one kind of coherent piece and then working with actors to deepen it further and then bringing the cast in and then really rehearsing, I think everyone's commitment to humanize these characters and make them vulnerable created an experience unlike anything else. And I think we were able, and I think it's just unlike any other film that people have seen. And that, of course, you know, the kind of cliches of about how films are made, where you say, oh, it's a cross between, it's this meets that. That evidently stopped working as people saw, oh, this is unlike anything I've ever experienced. And I think that means the audience sort of has to, or the audience and critics and the film going and the public just need to sort of open themselves and learn how to watch something that's unlike anything they've seen. And we live in a time where where almost every film ends with a happy ending, or if it has a sad ending, there's a kind of moment of grace for the main character, but then they've given something up. So we're telling story after story after story. And I think it's the algorithms that drive this, where you're inspired by the characters. And that's not how it always was. I remember as a kid, people asking me of real Hollywood movies, like, do you prefer movies with happy endings or sad endings? And there was a divorce in my family. And I used to say, oh, I love the films with sad endings because that feels like my world. And I think we hardly make any films with sad endings anymore. It always ends well. And I think even to create a cautionary tale in today's world, and especially one where we're asking the audience to see themselves in characters who are flawed, human beings who, like us, are flawed, and then to reinvent the language of cinema. That all of that, makes the film, I think a really rewarding thing for people who open themselves to it, and also makes it, hard to kind of just encapsulate, I don't know, in a tweet or an Instagram post or whatever.
You may not have an answer for us on this one, but we're curious to know, do you feel like climate storytelling or stories about climate change and the impacts of it or the hope around it is something that filmmakers are turning their attention to? Is it something that Hollywood is turning its attention to? What are your hopes or fears around that?
I think it's really important that climate be integrated realistically into the stories that are told most volubly. I mean, it's a part of our lives that, it's a major event that Los Angeles, big parts of Los Angeles burned down. It's a major event that we have, killer heat waves every summer, that you have areas of the United States that never should flood, that are completely inundated. And I think that the fact that that's just kind of kept out of the backdrop of life in ways that other aspects of our lives are present is part of our culture's denial. I also think that it's really important that I really think that we're at a time when we have an existential choice. I began this conversation by saying we're living in a post-apocalyptic moment where we actually, it's been revealed to us how the end will come if we don't come together and change now together collectively. And we all know that. So I think stories that constantly reassure us that, yes, there's bad people out there, but don't worry, you're not bad. That doesn't encourage us to stop and acknowledge where we're wayward and adjust our course, because that just encourages us to do this, to pat ourselves on the back. And you can't solve a problem if you're too complacent, too defensive, too frightened, or too ashamed even to acknowledge it.
Yeah.
And so I think we need to demand real change, and we need to build audience and culture for stories that don't constantly address us as the heroes of our the righteous heroes of our own lives, and that actually show that we're closer to perpetrators than we like to think in all aspects of life. And I don't think we're going to just demand that by me banging on about it on a podcast like this. I think that's cultural change is going to come from building a culture of resistance. And as the dark clouds of totalitarianism build over the world's democracies, as ever bleaker climate futures become more and more baked in, it's going to change either by the Disney World illusion of harmony, just dystopian in a dystopian way, crumbling into something very, very ugly, or us coming together right now, collectively, in solidarity, as a single human family, and demanding change and not stopping until we get it.
I think that's absolutely perfect way to end. I really want to just say thank you for taking this time with us. Thank you for making this film. Thank you for letting us be a fly on the wall and experience this. It's been wonderful talking to you, Joshua.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much.
Thank you for joining us this week. We really hope you enjoyed this episode.
If you did, please hit the follow button to make sure that you get next week's releases.
And why not reach out with your very own climate confessions?
While you're at it, please leave a rating and a review.
Now, let's shout out to our fabulous team behind the pod.
Executive produced by Josie Colter.
Produced by Ben Beheshty.
Music also by Ben Beheshty.
Communications by Tara Cooper and Issey Gladston.
Curation by Deesha Chandra.
Hosted by Ben Hurst.
And Maryam Pasha.
And remember,
stay curious.